Good evening. Welcome to the Journal Club. Today we'll be discussing regarding our article, Clinical Profile and Ocular Morbidities in Patients with Combined Diabetic Retinopathy and Uveitis. So, I'll be the presenter and Dr. Aryan sir will be the moderator of the class. So let's go about how we came about with the idea of the article itself. First and foremost, all of us have noticed cases of asymmetric diabetic retinopathy. It is considered to be at a prevalence of 5 to 10% among all PDR cases. A lot of these asymmetric diabetic retinopathy have a lot of factors implicated in their coexistence. So, multiple factors have been considered that are considered protective against asymmetric diabetic retinopathy. For example, coexistence of retinal vascular diseases, especially branch retinal vein occlusion, along with central retinal artery occlusion, which lead to inner retinal thinning and finally lead to decreased metabolic demand of the tissue and impede the progression of diabetic retinopathy. Amblyopia, visual deprivation, retinal detachment, optic atrophy, diffuse chorioretinal scarring, again lead to decreased metabolic demand of the retinal tissue itself and lead to decreased impedes the progression of diabetic retinopathy. Elevated intraocular pressure has a similar mechanism. Retinitis pigmentosa, again due to generalized retinal atrophy, again it reduces the metabolic demand. High myopia causes thinning of the retinal tissue. Vitrectomy, on the other hand, it leads to increased oxygen saturation of the tissue after the vitreous is removed, and the sequestered antimetabolites that are usually present in the vitreous are thrown off. So the progression of diabetic retinopathy is less. Again, posterior vitreous provides a scaffold over which the retinal fibrovascular polyps can grow or the new vessels can grow, and hence after a posterior vitreous detachment, this scaffold is removed and thus diabetic retinopathy is impeded. Two factors are considered that can lead to progression of diabetic retinopathy. Carotid obstructive disease, on the other hand, lead to increase in the ischemic damage. A similar mechanism is involved in ocular ischemic syndrome. Next, so we thought about the concept of uveitis first. So let's think about, will uveitis affect the progression of diabetic retinopathy itself? First and foremost, let us think about it this way. Uveitis protective against diabetic retinopathy. So let's think about it for a minute. Chronic progressive uveitis would lead to an extensive chorioretinal scarring, which leads to a reduced metabolic demand and hence delays progression of diabetic retinopathy. On the other hand, secondary glaucoma and optic atrophy, which are complications of the uveitis itself, will again lead to a reduced metabolic demand of the retinal tissue and delay progression of diabetic retinopathy. However, let's think about it from the other side of things. So, can we think about it whether uveitis will mimic diabetic retinopathy in any form, or whether is uveitis also responsible for progression of diabetic retinopathy? A lot of pathophysiological mechanisms between uveitis and diabetic retinopathy converge. Breakdown of blood retinal barrier, increased accumulation of pro-inflammatory factors like interleukin 6, 8, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, and accumulation of VEGF. These are seen in both diabetic retinopathy as well as uveitis. Uveitis also leads to vasculitis-induced ischemia and free radical-induced damage. All of these will finally lead to increase in the diabetic retinopathy process. So let's see what do the previous case reports say. First, coming to the first case series presented by Noll et al. It presents two cases of background NPDR who developed unilateral uveitis, a patient each of herpes zoster acute retinal necrosis and toxoplasma chorioretinitis. Both of these patients had non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy and were followed up for 3 months. Proliferative diabetic retinopathy developed in each of the eyes with uveitis. Here in this article, they again implicated breakdown of blood retinal barrier, pro-inflammatory mediators, and vascular endothelial growth factors. Next, let's go to the second case study. So this case is presented by Murray et al., which shows a case of Fuchs heterochromic iritis, which was followed up and showed non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy in the uveitis affected eye and proliferative diabetic retinopathy in the other eye. Here, sympathetic denervation hypersensitivity, reflex vasoconstriction, and reduced perfusion have been implicated. Coming to the third case, it is a case presented by Schlein et al., where there was development of proliferative diabetic retinopathy after one episode of unilateral toxoplasma retinitis. So far we have seen three case series. Two of them showing progression of diabetic retinopathy caused by uveitis, and one shows where uveitis is actually protective against diabetic retinopathy. So which way should it go? Let's think about the other scenario. Can diabetes affect the course of uveitis? So as we know, pre-existing diabetes lead to an exaggerated inflammatory response during uveitis episode. This has also been recorded by Oswald in his article. This will lead to a higher degree of complications. Also, poor glycemic control will lead to a more severe inflammation, and on the other hand would lead to a progression of diabetic retinopathy also. Poor glycemic control again is a side effect of the systemic steroids that is actually the therapy for uveitic patients. So let's go to our journal. So after all this, after the whole thought process, let's take you to what we aimed and what we achieved. So coming to the journal, the title of our journal was Clinical Profile and Ocular Morbidities in Patients with both Diabetic Retinopathy and Uveitis. This was recently accepted in Ophthalmology Science. It is an original article accepted on 5th March this year and open access online available after 2 days. The article is currently in press. The aim of our article was to describe the clinical profile and complication of diabetic retinopathy and uveitis in eyes with concurrent condition, as well as to evaluate associations based on the site of primary inflammation, diabetic retinopathy grade, and complications of each. Coming to the methodology of our study, it was a retrospective study, which was cross-sectional and observational. Our inclusion criteria was simple. We included all the patients with diabetic retinopathy and at least one eye with uveitis. The clinical records, that is the electronic medical records of all the patients, were reviewed. The data were collected, including the demographics, that is age and gender, duration of the diabetes, type of diabetes, current diabetes treatment, and degree of diabetic control. The diabetes control was graded based on the Indian Council of Medical Research guidelines from 2018. Control was defined as a fasting blood glucose of less than 125 milligram per deciliter, postprandial blood sugar of less than 180, and glycosylated hemoglobin of less than 8. Any values exceeding these cutoff criteria were considered as uncontrolled. We also included data regarding diabetic comorbidities and end organ sequelae in these patients. For the cross-section, we collected the final visit examination data in these patients, which included the best corrected visual acuity using Snellen's visual acuity chart, intraocular pressure measured using Goldmann applanation tonometry, uveitis subtypes based on the standardization of uveitis nomenclature criteria, which divided the uveitis into anterior, intermediate, posterior, and panuveitis. The etiological of the uveitis itself might be systemic or ocular. The sun grading of peak inflammation noted in the patient, that is cells and flare, and complications associated with uveitis. The duration of uveitis and the number of recurrences were also noted. Diabetic retinopathy was staged based on a modified version of early treatment diabetic retinopathy classification. We classified them as mild, moderate, severe NPDR, proliferative diabetic retinopathy. We also included advanced diabetic eye disease that included eyes with preretinal or intraocular hemorrhage, tractional retinal detachment, and rubiosis iridis. Coming to the statistical analysis, the differential statistics were done using Excel, which were used to compute the mean, range, and standard deviation. Inferential statistics was done using MedCalc software, and chi-square and independent t-tests were used. P-value of less than 0.05 was considered statistically significant. Coming to our results. So in our study, 66 patients of diabetic retinopathy with at least one eye having uveitis were included. We included a total of, so our study had a total of 132 eyes. All of these patients had bilateral diabetic retinopathy. We had 97 eyes with uveitis and 35 eyes without uveitis. We had 38 males in our study, which was 57% of the cohort, and 42% of the patients were female. Coming to our results, the mean age of our patients was around 53 years. The duration of diabetes was around 10.5 years mean. Most of the patients had uncontrolled diabetes, that is 62% of our cohort patients. Most of the patients were on oral hypoglycemic agents for treatment of diabetes with or without the addition of insulin. Uh, in terms of diabetic sequelae, 10 patients had nephropathy, 3 had neuropathy, and 1 patient had peripheral gangrene. Hypertension was the most predominant comorbidity associated in these cases. Around 39% of the patients had hypertension. Coming to the parameters in uveitic eyes, 97 uveitic eyes were included. 35 patients had unilateral uveitis and 62 patients had bilateral uveitis. The average duration of uveitis was around 61 months, and mean number of episodes per patient was around 2.93. Based on the Sun classification of uveitis, around 50% of the patients had anterior uveitis, and approximately rest of the 50% had a combination of intermediate, posterior, and panuveitis. Based on the Sun grading of cells, most of the patients had approximately 1 plus to 2 plus cells, and based on the Sun grading of flare, around most of our patients had a 1 plus grading of flare. So the key points that we would note in this table are, we've noted a younger age of patients in our cohort. There is a higher proportion of uncontrolled diabetes in these patients, higher proportion of sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy, and equal proportion of anterior and the rest uveitis. I will be discussing these points later. Next, coming to the etiological diagnosis of uveitis. Generally speaking, about 10.3% of our patients had infectious uveitis and the rest had non-infectious uveitis, which was actually surprising. Coming to the etiological diagnosis, most of our patients, that is 40%, had an idiopathic anterior uveitis. Approximately 12% had sarcoidosis anterior uveitis, 10% had tuberculosis anterior uveitis, 9% had idiopathic intermediate uveitis, and 6% had multifocal choroiditis. Rest, we had few patients of rheumatoid arthritis, HLA-B27, idiopathic retinal vasculitis, sympathetic ophthalmitis, HSV-associated uveitis, toxoplasma retinochoroiditis, and SLE-associated anterior uveitis. So here the take-home points would be, we noted a higher proportion of non-infectious uveitis in our study as compared to infectious etiology, which is kind of startling in a cohort of diabetic patients. Next, coming to the diabetic retinopathy complications per se, we noted that there was a higher proportion of diabetic macular edema, tractional retinal detachment, fibrovascular proliferation, and neovascularization of the iris noted among the eyes with uveitis as compared to the eyes without uveitis. However, none of these values reached statistical significance. The other complications, including glaucoma, vitreous hemorrhage, neovascularization of the disc, preretinal hemorrhage, epiretinal membrane, as well as neovascular glaucoma, were noted to be equally distributed among both the groups. So here we noted that there was a higher proportion of diabetic macular edema, TRD, fibrovascular prolifes, and neovascularization iris in the eyes with uveitis in our cohort. Next, coming to in this is the fourth table of our article. We've noted that we have distributed the diabetic retinopathy patients between the eyes with uveitis and without uveitis, and we have and the staging of diabetic retinopathy have been considered. So, first of all, coming to patients with best corrected visual acuity in eyes with uveitis, we noted to have a higher logMAR, that is 0.98, as compared to eyes without uveitis. This difference was significant, which means that in eyes, the eyes with uveitis had a poorer visual outcome as compared to eyes without uveitis, which was statistically significant in our study. The number of cataractous patients was slightly higher in eyes with uveitis as compared to without uveitis in the cohort. Again, diabetic retinopathy stagings were distributed among the two groups, and we noted that there was almost a similar distribution among the two groups. However, as I noted, patients with diabetic retinopathy and uveitis had an overall poorer visual acuity compared to eyes without uveitis, and we had an equal proportion of non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy and proliferative diabetic retinopathy among both groups. Next, coming to the fifth table of our article, we have distributed the patients based on non-proliferative and proliferative diabetic retinopathy, and the uveitis details were considered. So, based on the Sun classification of uveitis, Patients were distributed between anterior, intermediate, and posterior and panuveitis. Here, we noted that we had a higher proportion of anterior uveitis among the proliferative diabetic retinopathy group as compared to non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy group. This value was almost reaching statistical significance. On the other hand, among the intermediate uveitis groups, we noted a very high proportion of non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy as compared to PDR. Again, this value was highly statistically significant. Coming to posterior and panuveitis, again, proliferative diabetic retinopathy were noted to be more common. None of these values reached statistical significance, however. Based on the Sun gradings of cell at presentation, we noted an almost similar distribution between both the groups. Peak inflammation? Peak inflammation was during the follow-up period throughout the span of uveitis, whichever was the peak inflammation. So here we noted a high proportion of proliferative diabetic retinopathy among anterior uveitis cases as compared to NPDR. This was also seen among posterior and panuveitis cases. Most significant finding of ours was a higher proportion of NPDR cases among intermediate uveitis cases. Coming to the vascular, or we can say neovascular complications among proliferative diabetic retinopathy cases with and without uveitis. Here we have considered only the PDR cases, which were 48 eyes with uveitis and 19 eyes without uveitis. Here again we can see the proportion of fibrovascular proliferations, tractional retinal detachment, and neovascularization of iris was higher among patients with uveitis as compared to the eyes without uveitis. On the other hand, neovascularization of disc, preretinal hemorrhage, vitreous hemorrhage, and neovascular glaucoma were noted to be almost similarly distributed among both the groups. So here, among our patients with proliferative diabetic retinopathy, we noted a higher proportion of tractional retinal detachment, fibrovascular prolif, and neovascularization of iris in the eyes with uveitis. So this is our last table. So here what we did is we considered only eyes with unilateral uveitis, and we divided these patients based on the eye with uveitis and the eye without uveitis. So patient-related factors, we had this can be considered as a matching of the patient factors, so that only the diabetic, so that we can more critically assess the asymmetric distribution of the diabetic retinopathy in our cohort. So based on this, here again, we did not find much of a difference between the staging of diabetic retinopathy among the two groups. However, as we can note, there is a slightly higher proportion of diabetic macular edema and TRD in patients with uveitis as compared to, eyes with uveitis as compared to their contralateral eyes without uveitis. Again, none of these values reached statistical significance. So here again, we found a higher proportion of diabetic macular edema, tractional retinal detachment in eyes with uveitis, and almost equal proportion of non-proliferative and proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Next, coming to what therapy the patients received for uveitis. This I have mentioned again because, like sir mentioned, oral corticosteroids will influence, because it is a first-line therapy for systemic therapy for a lot of uveitis cases. But however, they will also influence the course of diabetic retinopathy, the glycemic control in patients with diabetes. Again, a poor glycemic control would lead to an exacerbation of diabetic retinopathy as well as uveitis. Around 25 of our patients received oral corticosteroids. 8 patients were on oral immunosuppressants, 4 were on azathioprine, 2 on methotrexate, 1 on mycophenolate mofetil, and 1 patient was on cyclosporin. 7 patients had received antituberculosis therapy. 2 were started on oral acyclovir. Subtenon injection was received in 13 eyes, and 3 of the eyes received intravitreal triamcinolone acetonide. Coming to our discussion, let us go ahead and discuss the points that we noted in each of our tables. So first and foremost, we noted that there was a younger cohort of patients in our cohort as compared to that is normally seen. That is the patients with diabetic retinopathy in general population. So, a study conducted by Rajiv Raman sir has showed a median age of patients with diabetic retinopathy as 56 years. A national survey conducted in 2015 to 2019 showed a higher prevalence of diabetic retinopathy at the age group of 60 to 69 years of age. However, our cohort, the mean age was around 53, which is slightly lesser than what has been described. One possible factor we can consider is an early onset of diabetic retinopathy in eyes with uveitis. However, further research may be warranted in these cases. Next, we have noted a higher proportion of patients having an uncontrolled diabetes. Poor glycemic control, as we've already described, is a known risk factor for uveitis in diabetic patients and also influences the diabetic retinopathy status. This has been described by Oswald et al. In their study. A study by Ansari et al. Stated that glycemic control is a modifiable risk factor in diabetic patients. Uh, a poorer control suffered with a higher disease burden of uveitis, and a dose-response relationship was noted based on the glycemic control of these patients. So, very poor control, and moderate control were more predictive of uveitis. Similar results were observed when evaluating retinopathy staging, which means that very poor control and moderate control were more predictive of proliferative stages of diabetic retinopathy. So, coming to our next point in discussion, we noted a higher proportion of sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy in our patient, in uveitis in our cohort, and a higher proportion of PDR among posterior, anterior, and panuveitis cases. Although none of these reached statistical significance. 49% of our patients had proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Again, the pathophysiological mechanisms that have been discussed that involve both in uveitis and diabetic retinopathy include blood-retinal barrier breakdown and VEGF accumulation. Maybe both of these might contribute to the higher proportion of PDR among our cases, but again, we will need a longitudinal study to decide that. Poor glycemic control, which is again a no risk factor for uveitis in diabetic patients, also influences the diabetic retinopathy status. Next, coming to the fact that we noted a high proportion of non-infectious uveitis as compared to infectious etiology. In a study by Oswald et al., he noted a 10.8% infectious uveitis among a cohort of diabetic patients that they have studied. This was among 34 patients. In our cohort, we noted a 10.3% cases of infectious etiology, which was almost similar. Bode et al. In their study noted 25% preponderance of infectious uveitis among all uveitis cases in the general population in central India. Martha et al. In their study noted that most frequent uveitis in patients with diabetes were noted to be non-granulomatous anterior uveitis, VKH, and panuveitis. We also noted a higher proportion of diabetic macular edema, tractional retinal detachment, fibrovascular proliferation, and NVI in the eyes with uveitis. Uveitis itself can cause a neovascular sequelae as opposed to diabetic retinopathy, which will cause neovascularization by ischemia. Uveitis itself promotes a neovascularization process by the process of its chronic inflammation. Arevalo et al. Noted tractional retinal detachment present in 1.5% of uveitic eyes alone. Jalil et al. Proposed a tractional pathogenesis for occurrence of peripheral TRDs and fibrovascular proliferations in intermediate uveitis eyes as opposed to diabetic retinopathy, which was mostly center involving. Lightman et al. And Villa et al. Independently found tractional retinal detachment in 2 cases of heel candida chorioretinitis, which they attributed to contraction of inflammatory epiretinal fibrovascular membranes. Next, coming to the point that patients with diabetic retinopathy and uveitis had an overall poorer visual acuity as compared to eyes with uveitis. This value in the article was statistically significant. This can be attributed to a cumulative effect of diabetic uveitis sequelae as well as higher incidence of diabetic retinopathy complication in the eyes with combination of both, which was previously noted, which lead to a statistically significant best-corrected visual acuity. Also, although we had a slightly higher proportion of cataractous changes in the uveitis group, that might have a small contribution to the difference. We also noted a high proportion of non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy cases among intermediate uveitis cases. This was the most significant point in our study. We noted that among the intermediate uveitis cases, 80% of the patients there was a higher proportion of non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. That is, 80% of the patients had non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy as compared to 10% of the patients with PDR. Uh, one such one point we considered was that there was an early one hypothesis we can say that we considered was that there was an early onset of posterior vitreous detachment in the patients with intermediate uveitis. This would remove the scaffold that would promote the neovascularization process and would lead to impediment in the progression of the diabetic retinopathy. So this is the largest cohort of patients with coexisting diabetic retinopathy and uveitis in which the prevalence, clinical profile, and sequelae of both conditions have been described. We found a higher prevalence of diabetic complications, that is diabetic macular edema, fibrovascular proliferations, traction retinal detachment, and neovascularization iris than previously reported in eyes with isolated diabetic retinopathy. The best corrected visual acuity was significantly higher in eyes with isolated diabetic retinopathy than in eyes with DR and uveitis combined. Non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy was found to be significantly more prevalent in eyes with intermediate uveitis than proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Among the other causes of uveitis, that is anterior, posterior, and panuveitis, proliferative retinopathy was noted to be more common, although these values did not reach statistical significance. Hence, in conclusion, the development of uveitis in eyes with pre-existing diabetic retinopathy is associated with a significant morbidity and visual consequences. Uh, in the late stages of DR, neovascular as well as uveitis complications are more common in patients with uveitis. And also the risk of poorer visual outcome is more common. The therapeutic approach, therefore, should be immediate and aggressive to limit the severity and duration of the inflammation, and strict glycemic control is essential for reducing inflammation and preventing the progression of diabetic retinopathy to more advanced proliferative stages. Coming to the strength of our study, we had a large sample size, which was of diabetic retinopathy and uveitis, which was never previously considered. We had a comparison with control group, although the group was slightly smaller. We also had systemic parameters and glycemic status readily available with us to compare and correlate with uveitis onset and severity. Coming to the limitations of our study, it was a retrospective study, so all these so it faced the same limitations. It was cross-sectional. We could not assess the relative risk of diabetic retinopathy progression in presence of uveitis as well as the long-term implication in these eyes. We had a small control arm that is only 35 eyes, that is the eye without uveitis. And the study was conducted in a single center, which may result in bias. So coming to future prospects, we can conduct studies having long-term follow-up of these patients to actually know how the progression of diabetic retinopathy is in these uveitis eyes. We can study the factors affecting the diabetic retinopathy progression in uveitis eyes, also the subtypes or the etiological subtypes of uveitis along with the effect on diabetic retinopathy progression. I would also like to share that this article has been recently published as a newsfeed in Review of Optometry recently on March 11th. These are my acknowledgements. Thank you.
So, congratulations, really good.
Yes.
So, I would encourage all of you, the way she did this study and the way she wrote the first draft, thanks to Janani, she corrected the draft again. Very well written first draft and only one shot. So, it went to ophthalmology retina and they said that it is more suited for ophthalmology science and it went to ophthalmology science and got accepted. Congratulations.